Hey, what's up? My name is David, and today we're going to talk about the minimum wage requirement. Minimum wage is a big topic in our society today, and I'd like to discuss where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going, and what I believe is fair and what is legal when it comes to wages and what businesses do for their employees. All right, let's get started. Little brief history of the United States minimum wage back in 1912 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. At this point in time, the United States is a giant industry exporting a lot of steel, auto, and agriculture production. But in January of 1912, 30,000 textile workers walked off into the streets in what we now know as the Bread and Roses strike. As a result, the topic of minimum wage was heavily discussed, and there came an agreement after this 9-week strike that a change needed to be made. And President Roosevelt enacted the National Industrial Recovery Act, the NRA, which 2.4 million employers signed up for. In fact, Henry Ford in 1914 established $5 minimums for the factories, which is a lot more than it would be for a lot of different people nationwide. There was a giant pushback from a lot of big businesses, Supreme Court claiming that this act was unconstitutional, um, which makes sense. We always use the Constitution against change in what we believe are our rights. However, in 1938, finally, the Fair Labor Standards Act passed, which required 25 cents an hour for employees, 40-hour work weeks, and banned child labor. So the traditional work week that you currently have is due to this. And a lot of this was a result of the Great Depression. Um, and we're going to see a little bit more about where we are now. But it all started here. Next up, we're going to talk about progress and where we've come since Lawrence, Massachusetts. Over the past 75 years, Congress has raised the minimum wage 22 times, landing us at 7.25 an hour, which federally, that's pretty good. Obviously, it makes sense that places with higher costs of living had agreed to pay higher wages. For example, Seattle, 2015, signed for 15 an hour, which is a big part of this fight for 15 that you might have heard of on the internet, on television, on the news. Places like McDonald's, Amazon, or Walmart um, have been heavily targeted with this idea. But the thing is, these nationwide companies are not required to pay the state minimum. It's a federal minimum. Um, what are the things that we need to consider? And is it fair for them to pay the state minimum, or is it fair for them to pay a $15 minimum nationwide when clearly the cost of living is different in each place? Let's look further into it. I just want to talk about the dilemma a little bit about this situation and what the ideas are. Obviously, entry level jobs get entry level pay. If you're a high school student and you're first working at a fast food place or just at a local establishment, why should you get paid $15 an hour? If you live in Dallas, the cost of living is less. If you live in Montana, one of these places, $15 an hour is a huge hourly for that kind of place for a young person who doesn't have experience. Especially if we implement this 15 an hour, if we implement higher hourlies in states that don't necessarily require it, is that going to affect the profitability of those businesses? And then we also have to account for inflation and cost of living. Obviously, it's the most important aspect of this, and it's the only reason that this is such a sensitive topic. Moving on to a little bit more about McDonald's. McDonald's settled a lawsuit, 3.75 million. Um, a lot of employees in the Northern California area sued for unjustly compensation. Five different McDonald's um, owned by the same franchisee were affected by this. And the idea is that if McDonald's can make the Big Mac consistent across the nation and the price of the Big Mac consistent across the nation, then the price that they pay their employees should be consistent nationwide. However, I believe McDonald's prices their products the same nationwide to provide consistency for the customer, and they take a hit and it balances out in the end. I think increasing those wages nationwide, not considering the cost of living, is a little bit irrational. But according to the article and in the case, McDonald's has kept tens of millions of dollars of payments or of wages from their employees. Um, and the court did give their lawyers an opportunity to explain themselves. Next up, I want to talk about Florida. In 2016, Florida threw out three different cases that were appealed that were supposed to look into the Miami Beach minimum wage increase. Miami Beach was looking to set an increase of their minimum wage to $10 an hour and $13 an hour by 2021. However, this change came as a result of Republican Governor DeSantis, who took office January 8th. Along with that, several judges in the court retired because of old age, and new conservative judges came in, and they threw out these court cases without explanation. As a result, Florida Retail Federation, the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association became involved and are now fighting to have those appealed, because the idea is that in Miami Beach, there's a significantly higher cost of living than, let's say, Fort Lauderdale or Northern Florida. Northern Florida has a minimum wage of $8.46 an hour. The idea is that that's not enough in Miami Beach. And if these people this city who relies heavily on tourism is not going to allow its citizens of lower income jobs to get paid a little bit more to be able to continue living comfortably, then it's going to affect the economy negatively, especially in those places that rely heavily on tourism. But yeah, here's a little bit about federal versus state and minimum wages by state. According to the NCSL, which stands for National Conference of State Legislatures, 18 states began their new year with higher minimum wages. 8 states, Alaska, Florida, Minnesota, Montana, New Jersey, Ohio, South Dakota, and Vermont, automatically increased their rates based on the cost of living. 10 states increased their rates due to previous approved legislation or ballot incentives, and other states that we see increasing during 2019 calendar year include DC, Delaware, Michigan, and Oregon. So if you live in Michigan, hey, something might be happening soon. But in conclusion, I really want to say that really, as long as fair pay for fair labor is in place, I believe it should be a case by case basis. Different wages for different zip codes. Like you see on the map here, it's completely different nationwide, and a lot of that needs to be due to the cost of living, inflation, the specific industry that you're in, the amount of experience. There's too many factors involved here to just say, hey, let's make the minimum wage federally $15 an hour. I don't think that that's really possible. Obviously, there's a lot more to this than I've touched on in this little bit of time, but at least we can thank Lawrence, Massachusetts for our 40-hour work weeks and our minimum wage. Here's some of the resources. You can check out ABC News, A Brief History of the U.S. Minimum Wage. It's a little 5-6 minute documentary about how we got to where we are. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.